Hey, what's up guys? Rosario here and welcome to Modern Finance. Andrei Jikh is wrong about inflation and I'm going to tell you why in a few succinct points. Andrei Jikh, if you don't know, is this guy over here. That's right, the guy on screen. He's a finance YouTuber and I really like his channel. He talks a lot about cryptocurrencies, but he says that his channel is not a crypto channel. Today, he talked about why he's not necessarily happy because he's a millionaire, and a lot of people aren't happy because they're also millionaires. He said, America is rich, but it is not happy. Millionaires don't necessarily feel happy. Andrei himself said he's now a millionaire, and that was one of his greatest goals, but he's not any happier now than he was a year ago before he became a millionaire. Well, I think he's right about this, and being rich doesn't necessarily make you happy. But in the rest of the video, he goes on to blame this unhappiness on a few key things. And I think some of these things are right, but I think he makes a few mistakes that are really misleading and could kind of skew people in the wrong direction when it comes to understanding how inflation really works and what being a millionaire really means. So I'm going to start this video by calling out Andrei. Andrei, it's true that being a millionaire doesn't necessarily make you happy. But I want to ask you this. Are you really a millionaire right now? Andrei pointed out that household net worth in the US is at its highest level ever, and it's surpassing over $140,000. That sounds like a lot, but what is it really in terms of spending power? Can you buy a house with that? Not really. What can you actually buy with your $100,000? Andrei talks about all the time how asset prices aren't included in inflation, but in this video, he just mentions it in passing. He's assuming that because we make more nominally and because CPI says we make more now than we did in 2011, even compared to inflation, that we're all better off. But is that really the case? Can you actually buy more today than you could last year? I can't. It takes weeks or even months to order things, and that's painful. And the things that you can order cost more. Even though I'm making more at my job, or you might be making more at your job, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can actually buy more. It doesn't mean that you have access to better goods or better services or that your life is better off. How many of you watching today would actually say that your life is better today than it was before the Rona? Be honest with me. Do you really like having all these restrictions on your life imposed by someone else? Is that something that makes you feel good? If it is, fine, but just think about it. Andrei then talks about how more than 8%, or almost 1 in 10 American adults are millionaires. What does this actually mean? Well, really, it means that their houses are worth more than $1 million, so their net worth is more than $1 million. It doesn't mean that they're millionaires in the traditional sense where they own a yacht or they can do whatever they want whenever they want. A lot of this wealth is locked up and they don't have access to it. And even if they did, it wouldn't do a lot for them because everything costs so much. If you live in a neighborhood where all the houses in your neighborhood started off costing $100,000 and now they all cost $1 million, it's not like you can even move to a better house in your neighborhood. Everything's just more expensive around you. Andrei says that money is all around us, but we still aren't happy. I completely agree with this, but I don't think it's in the sense that Andrei meant it to mean. What I think is actually happening is that so much money has been created that has gone into the hands of a few people, and most of us might have more money than we did before. But what is having more money if your money doesn't buy you anymore? What are the things that people really want to buy? People want houses, they want security, they want cars. All of these things cost way more than they did last year. If you want to have experiences and travel, all of that costs more. So the things that brought people joy, going to restaurants, dining out, hanging out with your friends, those things are all more difficult now than they were last year. And the things that brought your family security, like owning your home and paying for your children's tuition, those things are all way more expensive and out of reach for a lot of people. Even if they're technically millionaires, they can't afford these things. So the things that really buy people happiness, those things are out of reach because so much money has been created and it goes into the hands of so few people that no one can access the services. So yes, Andrei's right that happiness doesn't depend on how much money we have. Money is all around us, but we still aren't happy. This is totally true. Consumer happiness and confidence are at the same levels as at the start of the pandemic. Think that through. People are as happy now as they were when we were locked in our houses. Think about how that bodes for our futures. People are scared. They might not know where they're going to work in a few years. Their job might be being automated. They might be worried about where they can send their kids to school or about how they're ever going to be able to afford their next home because the price of assets are increasing at such a fast rate. It's just harder now than it ever has been to get ahead. People who already have assets are able to grow those assets at a faster and faster rate. But that doesn't really make them any happier. It just keeps them ahead of everyone else. So all the people who are starting from zero and are trying to make their way in the world and are maybe already poor are having a more and more difficult time. Sure, they might be making a little more nominally, but on the day-to-day, life is more expensive and they're fearful of what things might cost tomorrow. Think about it this way. If you thought that going out to dinner tomorrow was going to be cheaper than it was today, wouldn't that make you feel good? If you thought that things were going to be more accessible, more affordable tomorrow, wouldn't you feel better? I'm shocked that people are so confused about how the human mind works. If you think that things are going to be better in the future, that makes you happy. If you think that things are going to be worse in the future, that makes you unhappy. It's so simple. If things in your life are getting better and you see a trajectory for them to get better, then you will be happy. This is how happiness works. I think people right now don't see things in their life getting better. Despite all these statistics that say we're making more now than we did in the past, people can't buy the same experiences that they had only 10 years ago. Almost no amount of money can buy you the experience of going into a restaurant in the city that I live in and not having to be subjected to a medical questionnaire and wearing masks when you go inside. That's just a fact. There's fewer experiences like that than we were able to have even 2 or 3 years ago. Things cost more. Going to the grocery store costs more. Buying a house is insane, and house prices are not included in inflation statistics. That is just ridiculous to me. So yes, by Andrei's definition of rich, we are all rich and still unhappy. But are we actually rich? What I would argue is that no, we're not rich. The government is tricking us into thinking that we're rich, and the central bank is making us think that we're rich by creating so much money and making it accessible to so many people. But the reality is, all that money can't buy you anymore, so you're not actually rich. So when you get rich, you think you're rich and just unhappy. But that's not the reality. You're just not rich. So now Andrei talks about some of the most important problems to Americans, and some of these are just laughable. Moral decline? Do you really think that people's morality changes that much over time? I really don't. Unifying the country is something that is a slogan and can't really be defined. The budget deficit is something that Andrei tries to explain but doesn't really get to the heart of. The budget deficit is literally how much money the federal government has every year that is in their budget that is over the amount of money that they get in. So let's say they tax $1 trillion and their budget is $3 trillion. That means they have a $2 trillion budget deficit, which is what's going on right now. But the problem here is that this deficit keeps growing and growing and growing, and we don't actually have $2 trillion in debt. This is like saying that over the last year I put $2,000 on my credit card. But what's actually happening is that every single year, that debt, that total deficit amount, so the deficits from every single year is going up and up and up, such that we have a debt of almost $30 trillion in the US this year. That's absolutely insane, and there's no shrinkage of this budget deficit in sight. The top 3 things on people's minds are pretty obvious. Number 1 is leadership. Number 2 is the Roni Rona, and number 3 is immigration. This is a finance channel, so we're not going to talk about Roni Rona or immigration, but leadership is something that people want, but they don't know that really the only place that you're going to get great leadership is from yourself. The government is never going to be able to make your life better. Life just doesn't work like that. You have to improve your life yourself. And I'm sorry, but printing money will never make everyone better off. And Federal Reserve Chairman Powell, it will almost certainly make poorer people worse off in comparison to richer people. So why you keep doing this, why you keep printing money is a mystery to me. I'm not sure why you think that creating money out of thin air actually creates wealth. What creates wealth are people, entrepreneurs, building things, doing things, actually working. Creating money out of thin air does none of these things. It's not a valuable resource and it won't help anyone. Now, we live in reality and I know this isn't likely to stop. I just want you to understand because the next part of Andrei's video talks all about who people are blaming. People are blaming their company. People are blaming their competitors, their managers, their suppliers. They're blaming the people that they work with for these price increases. And that's not the reality. The reality is that the central bank is the one that's creating all this new money. The government is spending money that they don't have. It's not your neighbor, unless they voted for the government, but even then, they probably don't know. It's the government. It's the central banks that are creating new money, putting that into the economy. And that new money is causing the prices of everything to go up because there's no new productive capacity created from that money. It's not entrepreneurs creating new innovations that increase efficiency. It's just fluff. It's not real. It's fugazi. Andrei says that labor shortages and supply chain disruptions are the problem. And this is absolutely true. But who is creating these labor shortages and supply chain disruptions? People aren't able to go back to work because they've been disallowed because of mandates. And whether that's right or wrong, that's a fact. Supply chain disruptions are caused by governments shutting down their economies. Whether this actually protects from viruses or not is yet to be seen. But what it is certainly doing is forcing people to stop working and stop creating things so that goods and services that people need cost more and are unavailable. This has real impacts on our lives. And people in society need to realize that these aren't just things that are happening. Someone has caused these labor shortages and supply chain disruptions to happen. Even if you think that these measures are necessary in order to combat the Roni Rona, we still need to understand that these measures have negative side effects. And these labor shortages and supply chain disruptions and inflation are all side effects of the policies that have been implemented to try to combat the Roni Rona. Money is relative. Inflation doesn't affect everyone the same across the board. Andrei talks about this like inflation is great for almost everyone and not for some people. He says because he works at home, inflation is good for him because he doesn't have to buy a car and he doesn't have to drive. But how many people that you know are in that same boat? The poorest of us, the people working jobs that make $20, $30, $15 an hour. Those people have to drive. They have to get to work. They have to pay for gas. They want to own cars. But now inflation is putting these things out of reach for them. So even if they're making more, nominally, they're actually making less. To throw salt onto the wound, Andrei Jikh is saying that people should be investing in the S&P 500 and Bitcoin right now by dollar cost averaging in. This may or may not be true, and the market may or may not keep pushing up over the next few years. But it's absolutely crazy to say that people with very limited resources and the ability to barely pay for the things that their family needs should be putting money into the market. I think there are better investments and you should be really careful before putting money into Bitcoin and the S&P 500 right now. About 2/3 of the way through this video and we're finally getting to some of the juicy stuff. Andrei says that asset price inflation is the second reason that people are unhappy. Well, what are assets? Assets are things. They're things we want to own. Stocks, companies, houses, metals, cryptocurrencies. These are all the things that have exploded in price since the start of the pandemic. Why is this happening? Because the government and central banks are dumping so much money into the economy and people have had nowhere to spend it. And what they're doing is they're taking this money and they're investing it. They're putting it into a new house or a renovation or into the stock market. And this is the reason why these prices have gone up. It's not because these assets are worth anymore. It's because people don't have anywhere to put all this money right now. This extra money that people have isn't doing anything good for them. That's why people are unhappy. If you have extra money and you can actually do more with it, that will make you happy. If you have extra money and you can't do all the things that you wanted to do, or even all the things that you could do 3 years ago, then you're going to be less happy. Sure, wages have grown. You made $22.35 on average in America in 2011 versus $30.96 per hour today. But can you do all the things that you wanted to do? Inflation has been 24.5%. This is consumer price inflation. Wage growth has been 35.5%. But real estate has gone up like 30% in the last year alone. So if you want to own a house, you're certainly not better off today than you were in 2011. That's absolutely ridiculous and makes no sense whatsoever. Sure, inflation as measured by Consumer Price Index, which is basically a basket of crap that nobody wants, is not that high. So you might be able to afford rent at a crappy apartment, and you might be able to afford an off-brand of batteries that cost more back in 2011 than they do today relative to how much you're making. But you can't buy the cool stuff. You can't buy the awesome things. A new iPhone costs more than it did in 2007. A new house costs substantially more. Even with improvements in technology, we're still seeing price increases. That's crazy. Technology prices should be plummeting, but instead they're going up. Why is that? It's because the government and central banks are creating new money and stopping people from working. That creates shortages and it creates price inflation. People can't buy as much as they want. They're not able to do and buy the things that they were able to buy even a few years ago. Andrei criticizes people for saying that they're angry when they see that prices are going up. That's ridiculous. Of course you should be angry when prices go up. The problem is that people don't understand who they should be angry with. People are angry with their boss. They're angry with executives, suppliers, their company, and wholesalers. None of these people have any say on the price of goods and services. They're just running their business. They're trying to make things happen. They're trying to create value. Those are not the people that you should be angry with. The people that you need to be angry with are the government and the people who elect people who create money out of thin air and think they can solve problems by doing nothing. People who work hard and are productive and create new things cause prices to go down. They create competition. They create products and services that people want. They make your life better. I think the problem that we're having is misplaced anger. I think people see that their purchasing power is eroding and they don't know who to blame because, of course, the government says and the central bank says, oh, inflation is not a problem. We print all this money and nothing bad happens. But obviously, if you look out into the world and look at the things you want to buy, you can't buy them anymore. Even if you're making 10, 20, 30% than you were last year, you can't buy a house because they cost 30% more. You can't travel anywhere because the world is locked down. You can't drive across the country because gas costs 30, 40, 50% more. Sure, you can buy an electric car, but those are also getting more expensive. Teslas have increased in price almost 15% in the last year. That's crazy. I need to reiterate this. It's not your boss or your competition that is creating inflation. It's the government and the central banks that produce inflation. Okay, now we're coming to some of the psychology piece, and I'm going to get a little technical here, but hear me out. In the last 5 years, why did your income grow? Andrei says that the answer is inflation. People thought it was because of them, but in reality, if you attribute something to an external cause, you're going to feel worse about it. So the fact that people thought that their incomes were increasing because of them is a good thing. Sure, inflation might make you feel better in the short term, but it doesn't really mean that you're making more. If you're doing a better job and you're being more productive, that means you actually deserve to earn more and that your salary or your compensation needs to be adjusted, because if you're more productive, you can demand more from the market because your labor is more valuable. The reality is, Andrei, that people aren't making more because of inflation. Inflation makes you earn more nominally, but it can never make your labor more valuable. All inflation can do at its best is make you earn a little bit more, but everything also costs a bit more, so you're back to square one. What inflation does in reality is it puts money in the hands of wealthy people first, and then it trickles down to the rest of the economy where people take time to catch up. So prices actually go up before you earn more. So in this case, you're actually worse off. Think about this for yourself and in your own life. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think that CPI is BS. Compared to what you were making 10 years ago, sure, you might be making more now, but can you afford a bigger house or any real assets? Is it easier for you to travel? Is it easier for you to go see your family? The next question in the survey that Andrei talked about is that if inflation was higher, how would that affect your income? Andrei said that the answer should have been my income would go up, but this is actually wrong. If nothing else changes and inflation is higher, your real income is actually going down. All inflation means is that prices are going up. Wages are not really included in inflation. So people answered all over the place. Here's the thing. Inflation doesn't necessarily mean your income goes up. Also, assuming your income stays flat, then you are actually losing purchasing power. So the answers where people said their income goes down actually makes sense. Not everyone is making more money now than they were last year. Many people are making a higher dollar amount, but those dollars buy them fewer goods and services. Most people don't fully understand how inflation affects their lives. I agree with this, but Andrei says they only understand the negative aspects. No one understands why they benefit from inflation. I completely disagree with this. I think that people don't understand the negative aspects of inflation, and they also don't understand there are no positive aspects of inflation. But nobody understands the negative aspects either. They think that inflation is caused by supply chain shortages or labor shortages, but in reality, inflation is just caused by the government creating money. The government creates money to pay for initiatives that they don't have the tax revenue to pay for. They create inflation to take money out of your pockets and spend it on things that they want without having to tax you more for those things. The last thing that Andrei talks about, I think, is actually a really good point. People like to compare themselves to others. This makes them feel bad. It absolutely does. If you're looking at your life and you're comparing yourself to someone down the road or someone on YouTube who might be better off than you or have more money than you, it's just not going to make you feel good. Even comparing yourselves to others who might be doing worse off than you is not going to make you feel good. It's just going to make you feel like a jerk for comparing yourself to someone who's worse off than you. So when Andrei says comparing yourself to others is the thief of all joy, I absolutely agree. But Andrei, please understand, inflation is not a good thing. We shouldn't be happy about inflation. And maybe the reason that people are unhappy isn't because they're stupid. It's just because they don't understand that it's the government and the central banks that are taking their money away from them. They're creating inflation, they're causing prices to go up, and they're making their lives worse off in the process. In reality, the only thing that makes our lives better is increased productivity and businesses and people working to make the world a better place. Printing money out of thin air and taxing people actually reduces the size and scope of things that can be produced in the economy. So Andrei, please keep doing great work. I'm really happy with your channel and I love to watch your videos. But I want you to understand that people aren't unhappy because they're actually richer and being rich doesn't make you happy. They're unhappy because things aren't better than they were and they don't think that things are going to get better. The reality is, if policies don't change, and we don't stop printing money, things aren't going to get better. There are a lot of things that can make us happy, like pets, for example, but I don't think that inflation is one of those things. Let me know if you agree down in the comments below, and be sure to get your 2 free stocks when you sign up with the link to Wealthsimple below. But for now, guys, that's all. We'll talk to you in the next one. Peace.